I wrote a book called Explanations and Corrections in the Gospel of Luke, and in this video I'm going to read part of a chapter or section called Correction of Matthew 26:64 and Mark 14:62. The hardest and most interesting part of this book pertains to Jesus' speech about when the temple would be destroyed. But here's another change that Luke made that has a shorter explanation. This example makes it clear that Mark and Matthew contain mistakes. In Matthew 26:64, American Standard Version, Jesus tells the high priest, "Henceforth ye shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Similarly, Jesus tells the high priest in Mark 14:62, "Ye shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." This is the way Luke saw those two scriptures. And I crossed out the things Luke objected to. Henceforth ye shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power. Of God is in brackets because Luke added that, and coming on the clouds of heaven. And ye shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Those are the two different verses in Mark and Matthew. Luke 22:69 reads, "But from henceforth shall the Son of Man be seated at the right hand of the power of God." It reads in the Douay, "But hereafter the Son of Man shall be sitting on the right hand of the power of God." Notice that Matthew and Mark use the puzzling expression right hand of power. Luke saw the ambiguous words of those Gospels and, keeping the original words as much as possible, removed some of the ambiguity by adding the words of God, to theou in Greek. Consider Hebrews 1:3, which says that Jesus sat down on the right hand of the Majesty. Hebrews 10:12 expresses the same thing without requiring interpretation, sat down on the right hand of God. Luke didn't want Theophilus to be confused by the expression the right hand of power. Elsewhere, Luke spoke of the right hand of God in Acts 2:33 through 34 and 7:55 through 56. Theophilus learned in Acts 2:34 that the expression is an allusion to a passage in Psalm 110. Psalm 110:1 is the original source for all the scriptures mentioned above, and it didn't say the right hand of power or of the Majesty, but in the American Standard Version, "Jehovah saith unto my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool." The phrase right hand of power, as also the right hand of the Majesty, means the right hand of Jehovah, that is to say, the right hand of God. Maybe the religious leaders, thinking the divine name was too holy to say, use power as a substitute for Jehovah. Luke got rid of the words "ye shall see," which is the one word opsis there in Greek. The context required that this apply to the high priests and the members of the council. The words were never spoken. This is one of several passages that Luke changed because what he found in Matthew or Mark was wrong, and Luke didn't explicitly say that those Gospels were wrong or why they were wrong. He just corrected them. In Acts 7:55, Luke said that Stephen did see the Son of Man at God's right hand in heaven, but not coming on the clouds of heaven, which was a different time. He, being full of Holy Spirit, looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing on the right hand of God. If being full of Holy Spirit was a requirement to be able to see Jesus on the right hand of God, then the religious leaders under discussion never saw him there. Luke relates in Acts 2:33 through the mouth of Peter that the Son of Man sat on the right hand of God right after his resurrection. Being therefore by the right hand of God exalted, and having received of the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he hath poured forth this which ye see and hear. Some other translations and numerous commentators agree with the American Standard Version above in saying that Jesus was resurrected by or by means of God's right hand instead of to God's right hand. Even if they're right about this verse, Jesus was exalted by God's right hand to God's right hand. The next verse, Acts 2:34, quotes Psalm 110:1. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies the footstool of thy feet. Other passages in the Christian scriptures confirm that Jesus was resurrected to God's right hand, but the return of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven was a different time. Luke 21:27 refers to the return of Jesus at a time of great anguish for the whole world, after the destruction of Jerusalem and after the captivity of the Jews. According to Acts 1, the apostles saw Jesus disappear into a cloud out of their sight. The angels tell them in Acts 1:11 that Jesus, who was received up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye beheld him going into heaven. So Jesus couldn't bear Mark and Matthew seemingly making the two periods equivalent. And then Luke made sure that the reader of Acts would know when Jesus sat on God's right hand and when Jesus was going to return in the clouds. Jesus sat at God's right hand soon after his death, according to chapters 2 and 7 of Acts. But Jesus' return in the clouds was still future at the end of Acts. That was the time that living Christians were to be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, according to 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 17. So Luke eliminated the part about coming on the clouds of heaven and Luke 2:69, so Theophilus wouldn't be confused and misinformed. Suppose, for example, that the death of Jesus occurred in 30 AD, the date given in Kerr's Harmony of Gospels. That is when Jesus sat at God's right hand. And suppose that Luke wrote his Gospel and also Acts for Theophilus in 63 AD, an approximate date given in some commentaries. Then Theophilus would naturally wonder just when those rulers had seen the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power during the previous 33 years. From reading Matthew and Mark, Theophilus might have thought that the time the Son of Man sat on the right hand of power was the same time as he would be seen in the clouds of heaven. But Luke made sure he didn't make that mistake. We might wonder, in defense of Matthew and Mark, if the chief priests did indeed see Jesus at the right hand of power, not literally but figuratively, at the time of Jesus' execution, when they saw the miracles like the darkness, or did they see this sight figuratively by seeing the miracles recorded in Acts of the Apostles? Or we might wonder whether they were destined to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, which was supposed to come before the generation passed away? The answer to all of this is no. Luke would have written those interpretations into Luke and Acts if they were correct. We don't need to torment our minds trying to defend Matthew if we accept the fact that Luke corrected Matthew. Luke didn't want Theophilus to be misled and perplexed, wondering about the high priest and the council seeing Jesus. He wanted Theophilus to know that Jesus had simply said that soon thereafter the Son of Man would be at the right hand of God. The pronoun ye in Mark 16 and Mark 14:62 is an archaic second person plural pronoun, the plural form of thou. Since the word is plural, it refers to more people than the high priest whom Matthew and Mark said was speaking to Jesus. Before Luke wrote his gospel, first century Christians knew that the Jewish religious leaders who condemned Jesus never saw Jesus in heaven, so they must have either thought that Jesus' statement was mistaken or else interpreted Jesus' words figuratively, as do later commentators. And I'm not going to read some stuff I wrote about how that you might think that those words were spoken figuratively, because I'm trying to keep the YouTube shorter. And then Luke wrote in Acts 3:21 that Jesus would remain in heaven until the restoration of all things. That would be a time when, in the words of two angels of Acts 1:11, this Jesus who was received up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye beheld him going into heaven. And that promised coming of Jesus in the clouds, never came during Acts of the Apostles. If Porphyry's lost books are ever found, they may include the same objection that Edward Evanson made. This is a public domain book, just like American Standard Version's public domain. He quoted the passage under discussion and reproached it, saying, "Nevertheless, from this time forth shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven." A prediction absolutely false, because the Jewish nation from that time to this have never seen any such thing, but still remain incredulous to his being the promised Christ. And in review, Luke didn't think that either the rulers of the Jews or the Jews as a nation ever saw Jesus sitting at the right hand of God. Stephen did, but only under the power of the Holy Spirit. Luke made it clear that Jesus began sitting at the right hand of God soon after his death. Luke made it clear that Jesus had not come on the clouds of heaven even 30 or 35 years after Jesus' death when he wrote Acts. And the word power, which confuses the passages, is probably a substitute for the tetragrammaton, for Jehovah or Yahweh. Luke made it more understandable by writing the power of God. This was an act of explaining the text in Mark and Matthew. Luke didn't find power of God in a manuscript. There are numerous other explanations in Luke.